You're right, guys. Welcome to episode 7 of Muscle Owl Talks. It was wonderful. We got Zoe and Sarah here, who've both been on before, but not in the same. And in fact, Michaela, this is quite funny. As I said before, 3 people with different types of muscular dystrophies. First time in the last one, and again.
No, the second time.
Wow, the variety, the diversity that we're bringing out. So
do you even know what type of muscular dystrophy I have?
I do. I know what all types of people have. I can just tell.
I told you. So
Peter knows everything.
In fact, is this something we could bring up? Are you okay with us guessing your muscular dystrophy? I'm pretty certain that you have limb-girdle muscular dystrophy.
You'd be right.
I don't have one myself, but in fact, I was going to say, with my brother having Duchenne muscular dystrophy, we're actually representing 4 here. This is pretty good. So yeah, that's which type of limb girdle do you have?
Well, that is the question.
Oh,
I can answer that. Yes.
Diagnosed?
I have mystery meat muscular dystrophy.
What? Oh, a mystery. Oh,
yeah.
I thought that was the name. I was going to say
that'd be great, wouldn't it? Muscular mystery.
It'd be good on diagnosis time when you get you have. Oh, wow. You got him laughing. Yeah, so, of course, Sarah, you have congenital muscular dystrophy. We're going to do congenital awareness, in fact, very soon. And in fact, we will probably do limb girdle awareness around 30th of September, limb girdle awareness day. So maybe Zoe will be joining us then to tell her story. Limb girdle. But in fact, that leads on quite well because the topic of today's episode being the young girl, the 14-year-old girl who in the States has decided that she would like to end her own life. She has the exact same type of muscular dystrophy as Michaela, SMA type 2. Would you want to do a very brief intro to, Michaela, who you were at 14, how you felt, and maybe how you feel there are possible misrepresentations in the media as to the nature of her condition?
Yeah, so I suppose there's a couple of things worth mentioning off the bat. I have SMA type 2, but I identify that I'm probably fairly middle of the road. And SMA type 2 has 2 organs that are so far apart, it's nearly impossible even to classify those who are on the weaker end of the scale beside the ones who are on the upper end of the scale. It's so vast. But I identify kind of smack bang in the middle. I have some arm movement, although not much, and some leg movement, not much. And my chest is probably fairly average at 4 infections a year. Jerica, the young girl in America, is infinitely weaker than me. How much weaker is debatable. I don't really know enough. But when I was 14, or better than that, when my sister was 14, she passed away. So 14 was always a raw age for me anyway, and I remember getting to the 20th day before my 15th birthday thinking I just got to get through the next 24 hours and I'm past this superstitious OCD thing that I was going through at that time. But at the same time, even before that, I went through stages where I would really only get 5 or 6 hours out of bed a day. So all of that combines into something that does kind of need to find that path. What am I doing here? Why am I going through this? And eventually gets to the point where that kind of evaporates. But living with SMA, everybody will have some type of chronic pain, like Jerica. I probably had my first share of chronic pain in the past 2 weeks. This is a cat is back on the head. But yeah, it just is what it is, and I live within the realms of that, but that's my decision and my reality, and I'm under no illusion that her reality is very different to mine. But there's been a lot of discussion about it over the past couple of weeks. Whether she's right or wrong, there's been a lot of bickering among parents and carers and disabled people themselves. Everybody's torn on another part, and I kind of stood back from that and tried not to embroil myself in it. But I think it's an important debate that needs to be had.
So we definitely heard a lot of what you thought last last episode, maybe more in this episode. But in terms of, in fact, Zoe and Sarah, do you have any strong views on the topic? Or do you have views around the age of 14 and, that age, 13, 14, 15, the teenage years of being a young girl growing up? Not that I'm separating teenage girls here from, how men act, but, I know that as a teenager, the world can be a very confusing place. And I think those are the kind of the three things that we're separating it up into, with the third being media representation. It does seem like you can be very impressionable as a 14-year-old. And when a lot of the media is kind of gearing up to go, oh, isn't this wonderful? She's having a prom done for her and all this stuff. I don't know. Do you think it is her own prerogative to do what she wants to do?
I guess I don't have a comparable experience. I didn't start using a wheelchair until I was about 15 or 16. So when I was the same age as this girl, kind of my disability wasn't something that was really that real to me. It was kind of more of like a far off concept of something that I knew was there, but wasn't really affecting my life massively in a lot of ways. I wasn't particularly wasn't participating very much in sports, and I couldn't really walk that far. But as a teenage girl, that was fine, because no teenage girls want to participate in sports or walk very far. So actually, that was great for me. But I do know that when I was around that age, that was when things started to change. Things started to go a little bit downhill, sort of in terms of my ability to do stuff. And I was very resistant to it, and I was in denial about quite a lot of it. And when the time came for me to start using a wheelchair, that was really something that I just didn't want to do. I thought it was the worst thing ever. And I would, I was trying to sort of put it off and kind of argue that I didn't need it and all of this kind of thing. And it did take, it took sensible adults to kind of talk me down from where I was and convince me that it was the right thing to do, even though for me it just seemed like it was going to ruin my life and nothing would ever be the same, and everyone would think I was, some kind of like drooling vegetable because I was in a wheelchair and all this kind of thing. So, for me, there was a lot of kind of, I was quite melodramatic about the whole thing, and I did need people to sort of convince me that it was the right thing to do, and sort of change my mind about what I thought was best for me. Now, obviously, I'm not saying at all that she should have no autonomy and she should be kind of told what to do or what's best for her all the time. But I do think certainly at that age, my sense of perspective was very different. My idea about what my life could be like was very different, was quite narrow. I certainly didn't see much of a future for myself as a wheelchair user, because it was just not something that I'd factored into my grand life plan. So, and I couldn't really think about it any other way. And so I found that quite difficult. And then once I'd actually gone through the process of, moving from someone who was walking around most of the time to someone who was in a wheelchair most of the time, and I kind of adjusted my view of the world and my view of myself to fit my reality, then it became a whole lot easier. But there was a difficult period for a while where I really, really kind of struggled with who I was and who I wanted to be and who I felt I could be. I feel like potentially there's a similarity there with what I went through and what she's going through, although obviously her disability at this point is much more severe than mine was. I think it's that transition where you're starting to think about what your future is and how you fit into that future and whether you can do all the things that you want to do. And that's a really hard thing to come to terms with.
Yeah. I think the nature of being 14 is such a transition stage as it is. You feel like you've already sort of being treated like an adult and you're making adult decisions. Yeah, you are really a child. And I think, as I said in the last one, the idea of I'm going to end my life, who are you ending your life for? Is it the you of yesterday? Is it the you of right now? Or is it the idea of who you'll be or how you'll feel tomorrow or in a future time? And I think that's something that's got to be seriously addressed. And as Steve Way said, why are you doing it? If you're doing it because of physical pain, then that needs to be managed and dealt with. No one should end their life just because of physical pain. I don't know. Sarah, your views on being 14 and being wild and making silly decisions?
Well, I was like the typical emo child at 14, so I just wanted to die anyway.
You should have seen pictures of Michaela. She's wearing our shoes.
My pictures?
Let's picture you outside Downing Street.
Like black
That's
hair,
not the worst of them.
loads of black eyeliner and everything. It was
Wow.
awful. But like right up until probably I was 18, maybe 19, I would have had like bouts of like depression where like, and it didn't feel like depression at the time the way they write about it. It was very like kind of rash. It felt very rational to me that like someday I might just like not want to, like not be bothered to do it anymore. So like, but now looking back, I realize like I'm so glad that nobody ever did think that that was like a reasonable thing for me to feel, even though I didn't really talk about it at the time. I'm glad that like it was never something that I properly pursued, but then at the same time I can't really relate to her in the sense that I've not been through that many operations. I've not really had any chronic pain or anything, so that's very different for me. Like at 14 it was more just the grudge of life. It was like not any real problems that I had at the time aside from the usual
But
thing.
in terms of, see, this is something I'm thinking as well that we mentioned towards the very end of last episode, is in terms of the impressionability of young, I don't want to say again young girls, but young people. How would the 13-year-old version of you have been? Would you have, if that idea of if the 14-year-old with a similar condition had have been, this person's going to, and not just that, but being put on the news and this is, she's having this wonderful thing. Do you think it's possibly dangerous if we look at it in terms of society and how we view disability? Do you think there's potential dangers there?
Yeah, I think definitely with more like surrounding the people outside of it rather than just her. Like the idea that like if I'd have went to my parents and they'd maybe thought, if that's something that you really, really want, like my parents are seeing other parents, accepting it and maybe thinking maybe that's something that they should need to accept. It's more like the wider audience, I think, that worries me seeing it than even just other disabled people.
I think it's got a lot of potential for people to see disability as just, this is something where you'll eventually just decide, this is so bad, I'm going to end my life. I think we're not drawing a parallel here, that if this girl didn't have the condition she has, then it would be absurd. She would never in a million years be allowed to end her life. So to what extent do we say, okay, because you've got pain, because you have this condition, you're allowed to? To where do we separate it? Do we separate it?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because obviously most of the coverage that you see in the media where you have teenagers committing suicide, I know there was quite a lot of noise made a few years ago when there was a sort of a series or a succession of girls who killed themselves after online abuse, for example, because they were getting, naked pictures of themselves circulated, or they were getting horrendously bullied online, and that was viewed as a tragedy, and viewed as something terrible, and everyone should be ashamed of themselves for pushing these girls into the position where they felt that they couldn't continue living, that they had nothing left to live for. So it does seem slightly at odds for the media portrayal that we get of young girls with disabilities. So saying, we've decided, we agree with them that they have nothing left to live for. They should be. Let's encourage this, or let's not condemn their actions in the same way that we condemn the actions of able-bodied people who choose the same path. So it does seem a little hypocritical to me, and it seems a bit like we try and make it seem, like a good thing when disabled people choose that, and it's almost like this is one of the very few examples that the media seem to have of giving us agency, of making us the destiny of our own lives. It's like, great, look at this disabled person taking control of their life in ending it, whereas most of the time we're just victims of circumstance and we don't have any autonomy at all. So it's quite troubling that this is one of the few sorts of situations in which we're kind of congratulated for having, for making our own decisions and for standing up for what we believe in, not literally.
There is some desperate irony in that, isn't there?
Yeah, it is. It's really.
You can write the end of your own story. It's like.
Yeah, you have no control over your life right up until the point when you choose to end it, and then suddenly it's like, well done, you go take that opportunity. I find that a little bit gross.
That's why, like, as I say, if I was in this girl's position, not her position, but similar situation, and 13, 14, this would be a severe influence on me. Maybe it would make me think, you know what, screw you, I'm going to push on and live. Like, in the way that I see, certainly with you, Michaela, a lot of the pain you go through, a lot of the the operations you've had to have and stuff like that, I see, I don't know, Michaela, do you think, how do you think 13-year-old Michaela would be responding in the same position?
I was asked the other day how many surgeries I had before I was 18, and I sat down and I thought about it.
Did you say a high number? Because the papers would have loved that. They loads, and then they'll just say, oh, well.
I don't like my feet. I want to chop my feet off, but that's besides the point. If we think about what I went through as a child, so I had my first antibiotic when I was a week old. Before I even had my first antibiotic, I had my first MRI. That was because I had no ears, not because I had SMA, because we didn't know that at the time. As much as my mum wanted it recorded, that she felt that I had it, I was living the all clear at that point. And as time wore on, I went through more and more. On my 5th birthday, I had my tonsils removed. I had 3 surgeries to try and fix my hearing. I had a spinal fusion done. I had my peg tube inserted, then removed, then reinserted again. I had my Portahalf, did the same. I had a Portahalf inserted, a Portahalf removed, and then another Portahalf reinserted. And all this went on, and I added up to about 10. And it's actually got to the point where I can't be conclusive about that number. I've had one as an adult. I'm currently discussing the option of another one, and that will be elected. I would choose to have that surgery and have another 4.5 foot back in.
And to make clear, you do experience severe pain in the same way that this girl does and feels. I see your face there. I can't judge anybody else's pain, but it's a very similar situation. And you said something that I thought was very pertinent. You said, if I would have said that at 14, my mum would have been like, "No, you're blooming not," That's the thing. At 14, I mean, always humans are always so potentially influentiable. It's not a word.
Yeah.
We can all be very easily influenced. That age and by our superiors.
Yeah, no, I mean, my sister Martina died when she was almost 15. And she was asked one day by her classroom assistant what her life expectancy would be. And us being us, we never really discussed it. After Martina died, we did, because I was obsessed with it. But that was just the way I responded to the death of my sister. But Martina turned around to the person who asked her this and went, "Well, what's yours?" And every time I think about the story, I think of that. I think Martina did not want me to live up to see this as a curse. She wanted me to see it for the blessing that it was. And if anything, that one thing that she has left behind for me has brought me through more than anything else. And I'm not going to say anymore because I'll cry. But you get the idea. Yeah, I mean, that has pushed me through so much. And I don't want to... Yeah, the past 2 weeks have been hell. Well, 3 weeks, maybe even before I say that. But pain is pain. Pain is subjective. Pain, you can either choose to let the pain rule or you can push through to an extent. There have been plenty of tears shed the past 3 weeks with pain, but at the end of the day, Jarek is going through pain too, and we've got to balance that out. We've got to balance the fact that I've chosen one path and she has chosen another. The question is whether 14-year-olds will be making that decision and whether society has pushed her to that or whether that's an innate thing for her, that she wants to do it just purely for the fact that the pain's too much. And that's a dilemma for me. But I always go back to Martina turning around and saying, well, what's your life expectancy? Mm-hmm. And none of us today can answer that, not one.
Yeah.
I think something that Michaela and I both share about our teenage years is that we had very supportive families who kind of didn't take any sort of crap and any angst from us, however bad we felt our situations were. And certainly for me, I moaned and I complained and I cried a lot about, like, you know, how terrible my life was and how terrible it was going to be. And then I got over it pretty quickly because my parents were just kind of like, well, this is stupid. Look, here are all the things that you can still do. Here are all the ways that we can change sort of things around you to make sure that you can still have the life that you want. Here are all the opportunities that are still available. Here are all the things that, you know, haven't changed just because you have this disability. So for me, it was kind of, it never even really crossed my mind, besides the sort of the occasional fleeting door slamming moment, that my life wasn't worth living or that there was nothing that I had to kind of look out for, because at the end of the day, I had this support network around me that really were always there to kind of talk me off the edge. And I never really got very far into that kind of sort of depressed spiral that can lead to these kinds of thoughts. I guess some people could argue that by my parents doing that, they were maybe they were depriving me of my autonomy, of my right to choose, of my right to kind of reflect on my own life and decide what was best for myself. But, you know, I'm damn glad that they did, because at the end of the day, you know, I have a good life. You know, I have a great life. You know, with or without my disability, there's a lot of things I've achieved and can still achieve. And so having people there to tell me that I was being ridiculous or that I was making a fuss out of nothing, which was a very positive thing, something that, you know, I have no problem with. So it's a bit of a grey area, really, isn't it? I mean, how far should they have gone? If I'd been more stubborn, if I'd resisted them more in terms of feeling that my life was worthless or anything like that, at what point should they have stopped resisting me? I don't know the answer to that question. All I know, my personal experience is I'm very glad that that kind of behaviour wasn't taken very seriously and wasn't tolerated in the household. But, you know, obviously you have to caveat these things with that. I had a very, very different experience of my teenage years than to other people with disabilities. But my personal perspective is it was absolutely the right thing for my parents to do, to kind of just ignore my occasional bouts of melancholy and just kind of get on with things.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to finish things off. Thank you guys. And again, it's quite a melancholy end to the show. To quite well, it is quite naturally. But yeah, I think we've given it quite a good discussion in both episodes, Michaela.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's it's something that needs to happen. I just don't necessarily agree with the fact that so many people have taken it so personally on one story. This is something that is so much bigger than that. It's bigger than one young girl, and it's important that we respect her right to privacy and autonomy and everything else. But at the same time, we've got to discuss where this is coming from. And at the end of the day, it's through debate we get better and we improve society. And I think we've had 2 real good debates in the last slide talk. So hopefully things will get better from here.
That's all we wrote. That's it. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you again really soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.